the mass murder res map of the Middle East. Silence under first sentence, single visual map of the Middle East, missile arc from Iran to Israel. On the night before, Iran launched its largest retaliatory missile strike of this war, targeting over 100 military and security sites inside Israel. Diplomatic sources in Oman confirmed that a historic agreement to end this crisis was, in their words, within reach. That agreement never happened. The war continued, and now the man most capable of closing the deal, Iran's security chief Ali al-Ariandi, a seasoned negotiator with direct experience in nuclear diplomacy with the West, killed in an Israeli airstrike. Hours before the missiles flew, the question McGovern's documented analytical framework forces us to ask directly is this: who benefits when the off-ramp disappears? Measured contexty, the intelligence contexty, low music. Measured enters quietly, document overlay ODNI annual threat assessment, March 2025. The documentary record on this conflict is unusually clear and unusually at odds with the public justification for war. McGovern has written publicly, documented at mcgovern.com, that the intelligence community's own threat assessment from March 2025 confirmed that Iran's supreme leader had not reauthorized the nuclear weapons program he suspended in 2003. The Defense Intelligence Agency concluded that Iran was a decade away from missiles capable of reaching the United States. These were not fringe assessments. They were the official unclassified conclusions of the U.S. intelligence community. And yet by late February 2026, just days before the bombs fell, Oman's foreign minister was telling the world that Iran had agreed to enrichment constraints and full IAE. A second round of talks was scheduled. Diplomacy was producing results. NACO Mint overlay, Oman foreign minister statement, February 27, 2026. Then on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched strikes. The talks were over. McGovern's framework draws an immediate historical parallel here, one he has invoked repeatedly across his public writings. The pattern is not new. It is, in fact, the same pattern he documented with Iraq. Intelligence that does not support the case for war, it set aside diplomatic openings that could prevent war, get closed, and the public narrative is constructed afterward to justify what was already decided. The mass murder, mass murder, anything less is almost certainly a false flag. Not all analysts agree on every dimension of this assessment, but the documented sequencing, breakthrough diplomacy, then immediate military action is not contested. Breakthrough, the McGovern lens and Siebelt's measured, never sudden official narrative, Iran nuclear threat / regime change. Documented record, diplomacy succeeding / breakthrough imminent. The patriot in me, the patriot built over 27 years of CIA service, identifies a recurring institutional dynamic. Military action tends to follow diplomatic progress, not diplomatic failure. The analytical inference from his documented public positions is that wars of this kind are rarely started because diplomacy stopped working. They are started because diplomacy started working too well for those who prefer a different outcome. The gap between professional intelligence analysis and political leadership, stated rationalis documental here. USA intelligence, as reported by the Washington Post on March 16, now assesses that Iran's regime will likely remain in place. more hardline, not toppled despite weeks of relentless strikes. That is not the outcome the war was sold to produce. The regime change rationale and the intelligence picture are not the same picture, One of the analysts whose framing is consistent with McGovern's documented concerns about Middle East war dynamics stated plainly this week that Israel has sought a full-scale war with Iran for over 20 years. His documented observation, it is in Israel's interest to prolong this war and kill off any potential off-ramps, the assassination of Lariani, a man who once led Iran's nuclear negotiations with the West, who was present at an Al Quds Day rally just days before his death, removes precisely the figure most capable of conducting those negotiations again. Those familiar with McGovern's work, including his documented insistence that intelligence analysis must follow evidence rather than political preference, would recognize this structure immediately. It P, close and call to action, music, heads to near, silence, still visual. Map of Middle East with diplomatic negotiation timeline, the hook, ask who benefits when the off-ramp disappears. The documented record points toward those for whom this war's end represents a strategic loss, not a strategic victory. What McGovern's documented work returns to across every crisis he has analyzed is this: when intelligence is honest and diplomacy is serious, wars can be prevented, but only if powerful interests allow them to be. Here is the question to sit with. If a historic diplomatic agreement was within reach on February 27th and the war began on February 28th, what does that sequencing tell you about who was driving this decision and who was not? The mass murder, this kind of evidence-based analysis matters to you, subscribe and share this with one person who deserves to see the documented record, not just the official story. The most dangerous moment in any conflict is not when diplomacy fails, it is when diplomacy succeeds. And someone decides that cannot be allowed to stand.